Good morning and good afternoon. This is Monica Paolini from Senza Fili, and today I have the pleasure to talk to Upendra Pingle, the VP of DCCS, which is Distributed Coverage and Capacity Solutions at CommScope. And we're going to talk about in-building wireless. How do we make sure that we have all the connectivity that we need in indoor locations? Upendra, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Excellent. So let's get started, and maybe you can give us a little bit of introduction on what is that you've been doing at CommScope and you're doing now. You've been at the company for quite some time, and there has been changes.
Okay. So why don't I start with a little bit introduction of CommScope itself. We help companies build wireline and wireless networks. And in other words, to say that is, if you're at work, if you're at home, if you're traveling for business, if you're traveling for vacation, there is a good chance that you are somehow communicating with the network through CommScope equipment. So we are that provider, be it fiber, copper, wireless connectivity. We're able to provide that equipment to you so that you can go about your business. We are organized in 4 divisions, I would say. Let me start off with the first one being outdoor wireless. So all the connectivity you have on outdoor macro or outdoor metro, the things that you see on the cell phone towers, that's one business unit. The next business unit we have is broadband networks. So all the video and access cloud, that's the part of the broadband networks. The third business we have is home networks. So any customer premises equipment like your router, like your gateways, that's part of that group. And the last group is what we call as venue and campus networks. That's the unit I'm part of. And this unit takes care of all the in-building or local area connectivity. So be it copper or fiber or licensed or unlicensed or lightly licensed cellular connectivity, we take care of that. And if you look at my portfolio, I look after the license piece of it in building connectivity. That includes DAS and small cell.
Absolutely. And that's a big market because we sort of tend to forget sometimes that, you know, most of the access, most of the time we are connected, it's from indoor. And, you know, I've seen most of the estimates are over 80%
That's right.
of all connectivity and traffic is from indoor. So you have pretty much a huge part of the connectivity business under yourself.
That's absolutely right. You're exactly right. I mean, depending on which stat you look at, 80% of the traffic, if not more, goes through in-building, or what I like to call is local area, because in-building can be just within the building, but we are talking about stadiums and campuses also. So a little bit local area connectivity. And we see this piece of the business growing substantially. And I'll talk about what kind of trends that we're seeing in the market and where do we to invest.
Yeah, let's talk about that because, you know, traditionally indoor connectivity was provided from the outdoor coming in. And I think that we're seeing much more of an interest in having indoor infrastructure. And so can you tell us a little bit about what is that you're seeing from your end?
All right, so maybe I'll talk about the market trend in 2 different slices. One on the business or channel side and one on the technology side. So the business channel side, as you have seen, there is a trend from operator to enterprises. Neutral hosts are picking up, especially in the European area. We don't see necessarily the operator spend going down. What we do see is the operator spend actually including the enterprise and neutral host. So there is a more focus because of the technology evolvement. There is more focus on enterprises market also. And then when I link it to the technology trend, you're absolutely right. I mean, there used to be a time when DAS was the prevalent technology that you bring in an outside signal source and distribute that within the building. But now we see a trend towards small cells, wherein you actually have the signal source along with the distribution right there in the building or a campus or a stadium. And we also see a trend towards something like CBRS, for example, wherein not only you have the signal source, but the distribution, but you also have the EPC behind it. So you have a complete end-to-end solution that's right in the building. So these are some of the trends that we're seeing in the market.
And this is interesting because we see much more So there are many more tools that enterprises and operators can use to get indoor coverage on one hand, and there are new business models. So how is that changing? What is that your customers are asking you to do? Because you have more opportunities, but how can you meet their requirements?
Right. So that's a great question, because when you think about in-building connectivity, there are multiple ways you can cover that building or venue or campus. And those multiple ways actually can all coexist in a way, depending on what your application is. And if I think about a greenfield application where you're building a brand new campus, you have flexibility to go and influence that depending on which application you're going to put on what technology. What are you going to put on the wireline network? What are you going to put on the wireless, as in Wi-Fi network? And then what do you need? Cellular connectivity, if you need security and the authentication and all that. So for greenfield, you actually have the flexibility. But then there are a lot of buildings out there that may have the Wi-Fi coverage right now, that may have the Ethernet coverage. And then you go in and talk about the cellular connectivity or lightly licensed cellular connectivity like CBRS, and you can actually add on more application with this new technology. So I think when we talk to customers, because now at CommScope, we have all these different technologies, a lot of times the discussion goes into, hey, you have it all, why don't you tell us what we should do? So it's a very interesting conversation we have nowadays with customers.
Yeah, so there is several options, and you've been really working a lot in terms of expanding your portfolio through acquisitions and growth. And can you tell us a little bit about how is that working out?
Okay, so maybe I'll take you back a little bit in time in terms of how this whole thing started, right? So 2007 timeframe. CommScope made the acquisition of Andrew Wireless, right? That gave CommScope the access to all the wireless technology. With Andrew acquisition came the repeater and the analog dash systems, right? And this is, I'm going back several years. So that's how the world started, right? With repeaters, you actually take a signal and just redistribute it. With dash, you take the signal and distribute it throughout the building and venue. So with Andrew, that came along. In 2015, as we realized that the market now is talking about, back to your own comment earlier, that you need to have a signal source. So we made the acquisition of a company called Airvana that gave us access to small cell, LTE small cell. And we call that one cell, which we believe is the industry leading solution because it doesn't let the cell boundaries interfere and drop the coverage. So that happened in 2015. I think around the same time frame, we also had the acquisition of Tyco Connectivity, what we call as BNS. And that gave us access to the world's first digital dash system, right? And with that, we now have our digital dash called ERA, which is the world's first digital dash. And then recently, in 2019, we made the acquisition of Ruckus Networks along with Aris. And that gave us access not only to the unlicensed side of the business, which is the Ruckus Wi-Fi, but also the lightly licensed, which is the CBRS small cell. So if you think about it, as the market has evolved, we have evolved with the market, going from just repeating and distributing to having not only the signal source, but the entire end-to-end solution, including the EPC.
Absolutely, and all those solutions are innovative in the sense that, you know, it's not just small cells or DAS. It's a very interesting proposition that you're offering. So how are you working with all these products? So you have so much choice for your customers in different markets. You know, what are the specifics for different initiatives that you might have?
Okay, so maybe I'll touch upon CBRS as an example, because that's the new upcoming technology, especially in the US. So when you think about all these enterprises, that small to medium enterprises that may be going along with Wi-Fi and that may not have the cellular connectivity. And I can use the example of the building that I'm in. We're about 250 people here, and we had Wi-Fi. We did not have the cellular dash. We go in and put in the dash, and now everybody is able to use their cell phone in the labs where the outside signal just couldn't get in. But that application still needs the operator to provide the signal source, right? So it's a process that you got to go through. In comes the CBRS concept, where FCC is allowing this 3.5 gigahertz spectrum to be used for enterprises. So it's the best of both worlds. On one hand, you have the Wi-Fi like ease of deployment. On the other hand, you have the LTE like authentication and security and quality of service. So when you bridge the two, and when you come up with the CBRS small cell, you actually have something that can be quickly deployed, and you can actually put applications that are more secure that you couldn't do otherwise on Wi-Fi, or it would be too much hassle to put on cellular, too much cost and time. So that's an example of what we are able to do. And just like CBRS, I mean, we see the same application in Europe, for example. I mean, you talk about Germany, Italy, UK, a lot of same exact thing. They need that Wi-Fi like deployment with the LTE-like application, and we see that private enterprise market picking up even in the European side.
And in these cases, you're working with the enterprise and the operators, or is it mostly the enterprise? How do you see that changing? Or I guess neutral hosts as well.
Right. So when it comes to, I would say, small enterprises or small to medium, you work directly with the enterprises, but you go through neutral hosts, you go through your integrator partners. When it comes to medium to large enterprises or campuses, even operators have an interest to serve those enterprises, because there is a big chunk of people who have this unfulfilled need to be connected to cellular. So on that side, we do see operator engagement, but on the small to maybe a small to medium side, we see the engagement more from the neutral host type. And you're right. I mean, the market is actually expanding, not just from operator side, but including the enterprises and including the neutral host. And then the whole ecosystem also includes the distribution and our integrating partners, installers. So now the ecosystem is developed more into a much wider space than traditionally it has been.
Absolutely. And do you see any difference in terms of US and Europe? Before you mentioned that you see more neutral host activity in Europe, because in US now we have CBRS as commercial, but at the same time we see all these new licensing platforms in UK, Germany, as you mentioned, and other European countries.
Compared to CBRS, I would say the only difference would be the need for the SaaS as a monitoring system. But outside of that, CBRS and European private LTE, very similar markets, very similar dynamics.
Absolutely. Well, are you doing any work in public safety?
Absolutely. Yeah, a couple of initiatives we wanna highlight. There is a lot of excitement in public safety in Europe, as an example in Germany, and same thing in the US. And a piece of public safety I can talk about is the FirstNet application. But FirstNet is just one of the public safety things. Yes, I think the market is there. Market is actually picking up. And with the different applications coming out that need for more and more public safety in schools and in airports and all those applications, we see that market definitely picking up. The other initiative that we are doing, just going back and thinking about all these technologies, you can almost argue that there is no one size fits all, right? Depending on who you are, depending on what's your need today, what's your need tomorrow, this market is very low volume and high mix. So one of the things we are doing at CommScope is, how do we make sure that we tackle this low volume, high mix situation by leveraging our global footprint and global operations footprint by inventory stocking? Because what we have seen is that there are a lot of times we take a long time to make a decision in terms of what exactly you need. But once the decision is made, you need the product in like weeks, right? So we want to make sure that we stock it so that we don't left with long lead times.
No, absolutely. Well, and I guess, the more choices you have, the more, the more work you need to put to make sure you select the right solution. If there is only one, it's pretty simple. So I guess you can work with customers not only by offering the different solutions, but also help them choose among them.
Absolutely. Several discussions. Interesting you said that. Several discussions we have with the customers. It starts off by saying that, hey, you have it all. What do you think I should be doing? So what we find ourselves now with the entire portfolio of products, we actually find ourselves in a more consultative role as opposed to just going and selling, and which is a great place to be, because we also learn through that thought process. We also learn through talking to customers as to what their pain points are, what their different applications are. A lot of times they need to think about what they need now, but they also need to think about what may happen 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, so they don't duplicate the investment. So we actually learn through this entire process, and hopefully we are getting better in consulting with our customers.
Absolutely. And yeah, as you say, it's a mutual learning. And then when you learn from one client, you can go to the next and build on top of that. That's, that's important. We're all learning in the process. Now, you mentioned before, the role of different companies, the different company sizes. So how do you go about this in terms of, let's say I'm an enterprise, I come to you and I say, what do you think it's better? How is your recommendation change, say, based on the size of the company? Clearly, there are different verticals and different type of environments, but how is that size going to change the solution you need to adopt?
Okay, so maybe what I can do is I can give you two extreme examples, and then a lot of times the reality is somewhere in between. Okay, one extreme example is you're a large public venue, you're a big stadium, and every big operator wants to make sure that there is connectivity in there, right? The obvious solution there is DAS, right? Because it's just a massive scale. You're talking about million+ square foot coverage. You're talking about, if you're in the US, all 4 mobile operators wanting that coverage. So that's one end of the spectrum where you need that DAS solution. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say you're a small business owner, or you're sitting at home, you want cellular connectivity, you put a femtocell and you're done, right? But then you're getting X number of feet of coverage with that femtocell. So those are the two extremes. And then there is the entire portfolio that happens in between. And starting from the small side, you can start with small cell, and you can start with a single operator small cell. Then you can think about putting the second operator. As you migrate, you can think about putting CBRS at some point in time, because now you can have an end-to-end solution. So depending on the requirement, you can actually evolve from all the way to the lower end of the spectrum, from a femtocell through a small cell, through a neutral host multi-carrier type of small cell, all the way to a neutral host multi-carrier DAS type of solution. So depending on who you are, what your application is, we can actually provide you solution for that. Secondly, there's a lot of discussion about 5G, and 5G in a lot of places is happening here and now. In a lot of places, 5G will take some years. So how do you bridge the gap between what you need now versus what you will need in 2, 3, 4 years? So I think there is a path towards upgradability towards 5G that we have through our DAS as well as small cell solutions.
Absolutely. And I think that the timing is also, when you start working with the enterprise and you have a lot of experience there, the enterprises need a little bit of a longer time frame, because especially if they need coverage for IoT applications and things like that, they need to make sure it's not just 2-3 years. And in fact, it's even more than 5 years. I've been working with clients that are looking like at 20 years, and we're really not, in wireless, we're not really used to that kind of time frames. How do you deal with that? And when you are advising your customers?
Right. So typically what we say is, if you're a large enterprise, and just examples, I mean, if you're talking about, let's say, Ford or BMW, these are large enterprises that have large establishments all over the world. They want to make sure that we serve their need right now through LTE, but they want to make sure that we have a clean path to upgrade towards 5G, right? If you're a small to medium enterprise, as much as you want to talk about 5G, you want your unfulfilled need done right now, here and now, right? So you may, as much as you want 5G at some point in time, you may not be willing to wait, nor you may be willing to spend that kind of money to upgrade that. So you're okay with like an LTE solution for now, with traditional LTE frequencies or with CBRS, and then deal with 5G at some point in time, right? So it just depends on who you are, what your applications are. Another example to look at it is, are you putting LTE? Are you putting your license spectrum to use IoT, or are you using it just for voice connectivity or data connectivity? So it just depends on who you are, what your application is. And back to our earlier discussion, a lot of times there is a feeling that, well, if you go for this solution, you don't need that solution. I think you can actually overlay different applications on top of each other, and you can coexist these different technologies depending on what your application is.
Absolutely, and that sort of brings the issue of coexistence, because you don't have one, whatever the solution is, you don't have one, you have multiple of them, multiple one. And how do you get them to work together? Do you work in your customers with that as well?
Right, so classic example would be Wi-Fi and DAS, right? Or in future, it may be Wi-Fi and CBRS or Wi-Fi and small cell. One of the things we are looking at is, how do we make sure that for our customer, it's an easy experience, right? Now that we have all these solutions, How do we make sure that we have a common management platform? How do we make sure that there is a common interface so that the customer can go in one place and be able to monitor all these different technologies that they have? So these are some of the things that we are working on and we are investing in.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a sort of more specific questions about O-RAN and Open RAN. There's a lot of talk about that, and clearly indoor coverage can benefit from it. Is this something you're, how important is it for your solutions?
Absolutely, very important. Actually, for in-building wireless, we are part of the O-RAN working group. We've been working on that for more than a year now. And it's all about making sure that as we look forward to 5G, how do we make sure that we create an open ecosystem? And then when it's a level playing field, then how do you differentiate yourself by providing technologies and solutions that the customer is still looking at you as the end-to-end solution provider?
So that's all very exciting. Let me ask you a final question. What should we expect from CommScope in the future, in the next 2-3 years?
Okay, so I think all of it. I mean, when I talk about there is no one size fits all. I mean, if I just look at our portfolio in the in-building cellular space, I talked earlier about repeaters, DAS, CBRS small cell, and then migration to 5G. When we talk about 5G, there is a talk about millimeter wave, there is talk about sub-6 gigahertz. And I have to say that because there is no one size fits all, we are looking at every one of these technologies to not only mature, but grow. I mean, we are going to look at investing in every one of these technologies so that we can take care of any of customers' needs. We don't want to be in a situation where I'm in front of a small, medium, large enterprise, and I'm not able to solve their problem with the entire portfolio that we have. So we want to invest and grow all of these product lines.
So there's going to be more variety rather than less. So you see more of a need to expand to make sure that you can cover all your customers' needs.
Absolutely. I think the things that you can do with millimeter wave, you will not be able to do with sub-6 gigahertz and vice versa. So you can't just say that I'm going to focus on one and not the other. You have to take care of both. Absolutely. This is an exciting space. We think it's going to grow in every direction. The key is going to be how do you make sure that you prioritize rightly so that what you're doing from an investment point of view actually lines up with the market. So that's what we're up to lately.
Absolutely. And that's quite exciting. I think, like millimeter wave is just one example of how things are actually improving, and like there's so much more choice for indoor coverage that it's going to be really exciting in the next few years. So Upendra, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening in to this conversation with Upendra Pingle at CommScope.